Why no permit? Like, what's wrong with getting a like? I'm fine with it. Just get a permit. Like, why? You have to get a. You literally have to get a license to drive a car.
Yeah, but a
Um.
gun's your Second Amendment right, man.
Yeah.
Oh dear, I don't know. I'm like kind of terrified to go to like a giant public place at this point. Like, yeah,
Dude, I know. I mean, you kind of have to like. Um. You kind of like have to always just keep on the mind like how you're gonna escape somewhere.
God, it sucks that has to be the case. But yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah. Like
I saw a
it's.
guy pull a gun on his daughter last night. That was fun.
Oh my God. Where?
So, in Sacramento, we just stopped for dinner at BJ's, and it turned into a whole police thing, and we had
Oh.
to talk to the police. So that was fun.
What? What? Huh?
Yeah, like we parked in the to-go parking and we're just waiting on the food, and the guy parked next to us, and then his wife showed up, and then like something happened while we were in there, and I came out and they were like banging on the car, and he like pulled a gun and was trying to take the daughter. I don't know, but then she was screaming and he drove away and tried to hit her, and then we talked to the police for a while. So that made me just realize that like I don't like public places anymore.
Holy shit. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I wouldn't either. Jesus Christ. Pandemic's over. Welcome back. Hello.
Yeah. Hey, what's up? Hello, right? It's yeah,
Yeah,
okay.
hey, what's
But
up? Hello. Okay, well, we are live.
oh, good.
Um,
Um, what are we thinking for topics first here? I don't really give a shit. Or excuse me, I don't give a
no, you
darn.
can. I don't care if you swear. Um, yeah, what do you want to do first? Maybe Cheney, then Colombia.
Yeah, I'm fine with that. There's a lot to say about Cheney. And a lot to say about Latin America. Seems like
Latin
a
America, Colombia. Colombia is probably the main focus, but I also just had that little bit about Honduras and stuff.
yeah, which is interesting. I didn't know about that, but it doesn't surprise me whatsoever, unfortunately.
Right.
Yeah, Honduras is cool. I want to go there. There's I'll save it for the podcast, but yeah.
Yeah, yeah, hell yeah. Okay. So Cheney first.
Yeah, it sounds good. Let's do it.
God, I hate the Independent as far as the ads on the side and shit. Fuck
I
me.
know,
Look at all
dude.
these stupid ads, bro.
There was one that had like a giant Philip Morris ad that was basically like, "We're getting away from smoking and becoming a healthcare leader in tech." I was like, "That's interesting."
Alright, yeah, okay. Thanks, Philip Morris. A healthcare leader in tech. Jesus Christ. Down is up, these people. Um,
Yes, that is
alright.
true.
Alright, well then do you want to intro this one and
Sure,
okay, cool.
sure. I got this. This one comes close to my Republican Party, so I'm down.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Alright, recording in three, two, one.
I don't know if you guys knew this, but I just found out today that actually since the 1970s, there's always been some family member of a Cheney in the upper echelon of Republican leadership. And that changed today as Liz Cheney was finally voted out of her third position in the House following her just criticism of Trump and kind of her statements about reality and how the election wasn't stolen, all that jazz. But it sounds like the Republican Party has completely gone off the rails now. And I'm sad, angry, but not really surprised. So today on the Tonic Accord, we're just going to talk about maybe like how this happened and what's next. So, Drew, hope all is well. I'm back from a little small holiday and excited to be back with you talking.
Yeah, man, welcome back. I saw quite you're on doing quite the hikes. I saw, and it looked awesome, man. But yeah, welcome back to politics, and it never sleeps, and it's certainly not sleeping for Cheney anytime soon. So yeah, so like you had mentioned, she had just today been officially voted out of her leadership position, and kind of what that means is she's still a representative. She's not like she didn't lose her seat in government. It's more of it within her party. She is now no longer considered a leadership role. She's probably not going to be appointed to like chief chair positions in the future. She's not going to be really regarded as a voice of the party at all. And so this is what that was. So for people confused on what did they just vote Liz Cheney out of, she's still a government official. She's still a representative, and in fact, from what I hear, she plans to run again for re-election. But she's kind of lost all her sway within her party, and this is certainly a nail in the coffin of that, a symbolic gesture of we don't think you're a leader in our party at all.
Yes, very good point. And I'm glad you mentioned that because it's true that yes, she's not just kicked out of Congress or something, but it does obviously kind of show that the Republican Party's new litmus test is the big lie, right? And the big lie meaning the election was stolen and that Trump won and Biden's an illegitimate president. Lots of fun to put into that, and yeah, I mean, it is interesting for me that she is planning on running again. I know in the short term she's really unpopular. Things might change in the meantime, but right now I could not see her winning in Wyoming. I just remember what our friend Matt Gaetz back in the day. I mean, he even went to Wyoming to do a rally, literally to criticize, Cheney in her own state, and it's just crazy to me. And I remember during the early crazy days following January 6th, which by the way was only 4 months ago. Marjorie Taylor Greene, was doing all this stuff. Lauren Boebert, all those type of lovely winners, and Kevin McCarthy, basically said that the GOP was a big tent. And at the time, I meant maybe that's like they're saying we have enough room for different opposing views. But to me, at this point, I think it really meant that if people want to be accepted inside of the current GOP, they kind of have to embrace this big tent. They can't speak out against this big tent of crazies. And Liz Cheney never wanted to go along with it. She has a backbone, and you may agree with her views or not, but she does seem to have a red line, which is democracy, I guess.
Yeah, so that's where this whole thing kind of gets weird. Like weird is why this is happening because I think there's two main arguments as to why something like this happened to Liz Cheney, and they're not necessarily both. They're not one's not necessarily wrong. They're just kind of both true. But like, I'll get into what I'm explaining. So the first one I see is that um, I see it as Liz Cheney says, "Hey, I believe Joe Biden was legitimately elected, and I believe that Donald Trump lost the election." I personally don't think that's a controversial statement to make, but she's the one on one hand, a lot of people see it as she's getting punished for this. She's getting punished for believing that Trump legitimately lost an election, which is what happened. That's not up for debate anymore, and I think she even herself says that like we have to we have to be loyal to truth and like uphold what our courts of law say, and the courts of our the court of law has said that the election was valid. Um, however, the other argument I hear from Republicans like Jim Jordan is that she doesn't represent what Republican voters want. She just legitimately, he even says, I think it's why would you have a Republican leader that represents only single digit numbers of what Republican voters believe? She's just not in line with where the party's at. And he's not necessarily wrong. I think that's true. But the reality is, she is not where most of Republican voters are at because she accepts the truth that the election is valid. That's the thing. It's like both at once. Like she is getting punished for her belief that the election was valid, that Joe Biden won. And at the same time, she's misaligned with the majority of Republican Party because the Republican Party doesn't believe the election was valid. So it's in my opinion, it's craziness. It's like to me, it's like like kicking someone out for thinking the sky is blue. Like that's now like, well, she's not in line with the majority of Republican voters that think the sky is purple. Like, okay, well that might be true, but the sky is blue. So yeah, to me, from not a Republican, I see it as insanity.
Well, as a Republican, I also see it as insanity, so we can we can agree on that one for sure. And yeah, I mean, you're right. Just before we started recording, I just saw The Economist put out a graphic today, and yeah, 18% of Republican voters and independents, I guess they've lumped these together in this poll, have a favorable opinion of Liz Cheney. 61% don't. Right. And I agree with you, man. Like, I used to have an optimistic opinion that maybe Liz Cheney and Romney and some of these other ones would be the voice of reason in the party. But you're right. Like, Jim Jordan, unfortunately, is right that Liz Cheney isn't the Republican Party anymore. And to be completely frank, I think it worked out well for the propagandists and the misinformation on Fox News because Liz Cheney is a war hawk, and that's probably the strongest thing that I disagree with her on. Is that she's definitely a war hawk. She believes in strong intervention, and the Republican Party has clearly shifted from that. And so it's an easy talking point for Sean Hannity or Tucker Carlson or the Newsmax people to, mention that over and over again, and also talk about how she, voted to impeach Trump. And I think that culmination over the last couple months has led to these voters, like, yeah, there's a somewhat supply of sane Republicans still, but there's no demand for it. And I don't know if that's, I don't really know if that's a chicken or the egg with news or just the sentiment of middle America and a lot of like the southern states. But either way, you're right. There isn't a place in Liz Cheney's, role anymore. And I'm just going to just really quick, because I think you're right, is that like she basically got punished for speaking the truth, speaking reality. And that to me is kind of a sobering thing, because I'm going to start out by beginning with the F word, fascism, like right here, because like I'm not trying to call the GOP fascist, but they are moving in a direction that's disturbing in a lot of ways. And, like just so people know, like fascism isn't one idea. It can be left or right. Like some would argue that Stalin was actually more fascist than communist by the end.
Sure. Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, right, right. But it's more about just controlling power and maintaining power, usually through force, misinformation, grievance about a bygone era, and kind of this shared patriotism. And I feel like fascism, at least from like the historical context of Mussolini and Stalin and Hitler, it needs flexible people. It needs people that are willing to just go with the wind, like a Lindsey Graham, a Tucker Carlson. And that's what I'm worried, is that the party is becoming that, where, I mean, we'll get to Stefanik later, but she's one of those too, who you don't know what she stands for, but you know she stands for the big lie and whatever the party wants. And I mean, like Stalin, I remember, like he had, he was originally a communist, but by the end they replaced communists with loyalists. And I think that's what's happening here, is that it's loyalty over ideology. And to be honest, history paints a very bleak picture of what happens when that happens. And Trump, I don't think is smart, but there are smart people in the party, and they've kind of drank the Kool-Aid, and it's kind of scary to me, to be honest.
I think you make a really good point, and that's what's so ironic about this whole situation is you talk about like irony versus loyalty, or sorry, my bad, loyalty versus ideology, and the ironic thing, that's where I was trying to get to, is that ideologically she's not that far off of Trump, and if you look at the way she's voted, it's like 90% in line with the Trump administration, like 90%. That's pretty on the nose, hardline conservative. The things like you had just mentioned, the 10% where she was off of the Trump administration was on foreign policy, on international interventions and stuff, where she's much more war hawkish. So it's like, it's not even like this weird thing where she's ideologically misaligned. It's literally that she called out Trump. It's that she's that on paper says I don't like Trump. And that's what's so funny is what you mentioned, Stefanik, who's the most likely replacement for Liz Cheney in this leadership role, is if you look at again like the scorecard of how often they would vote with Trump, Cheney has voted with Trump more than Stefanik has, percentage wise. But Stefanik openly supports Trump and says she supports Trump and openly supports things like this Arizona recount, whatever. So it's like it's lip service. It's who can give lip service to Trump, regardless of ideology, apparently. Because again, it's like this idea that like Cheney's misaligned with where the party's at. Well, in their opinion, yes, like 60% of Republicans don't like her, but ideologically she's on target. But they don't like her because of she doesn't pay lip service to Trump, and that's what's really scary. Is it literally is a like the party's being consumed by loyalty to a figure that's not even in power anymore.
And that's probably the weirdest thing, is that he isn't in power anymore, and like as time has shown to me, it seems like Trump was actually somewhat of a glue for the craziness. Like it seems like the party's accelerated into a direction once he's been out of office, because there's almost now this mythos around him. And yeah, any movement or ideology that's centered around a lie and b a mythical figure who's false, I don't think either one of those end well, And you're right, like Liz Cheney, she's hyper conservative.
Very.
And I feel like we need, like, it's actually, I've got a little bit more respect for the Mike Pences and the Liz Cheneys of the world, because I full-heartedly disagree with a lot of their social issues. But it looks like the Mike Pence, who also agreed with pretty much everything Trump did, especially on the social side, he could have not certified that election. He could have been involved in the lie, and he said no. And I feel like those people are getting less and less. I've heard jokes about like Mike Pence might run against Trump. Hell no. Trump has
No
this
way.
crazy, yeah, like he has this Trump has this energy, man, where with one, well, not tweet, I guess blog post now because he's on that blog website he created. Pretty much with one typing moment, he can basically ruin someone's political career. And it kind of worries me because, yeah, there is a red line that Cheney and Pence and a few others saw and they wouldn't cross it. Kind of democracy, constitution. They're true constitutionalists, I guess you could say. But neither one could actually run against him because all his base needs to see is a post or a Fox News article about, I don't know, posturing Pence or something. And next thing we know, he's into obscurity. And that's kind of where we're at now is like you're either a Trump Republican or in nomad land.
Exactly. And I mean, I'm sure I know I'm not the only one that's going to have this take, but let's call a spade, man. Like it's pretty weird when you have the party that's so consumed with being anti-cancel culture have a vote to just like cancel one of their top Republicans for just like not agreeing with them. And to really go as far as to literally have a backdoor vote, apparently not even by tally, but by voice is what I've heard, is that they literally
Yep.
just yelled out like, should we get rid of her, yay or nay? And the yays won, and then it was like no one was even recorded with their names down. It was just kind of a really quick meeting. Very strange, man. It does not, um, it does not bode well, um, for I think our democracy when you have a party that has like tripled down now on the idea that our elections are unfair. Um, so like what is the so let's take that at face value. Like now let's say like after this moment marks that then the Republican Party as a party believes that the previous election was unfair and there was election fraud based off of no evidence. In the next election, what happens? Like, okay, so let's say the next election happens and the Democrats win. Will Republicans accept that? Or let's say the next elections Republicans win back the House. Will they ever allow a Democrat to take it back without claiming fraud? Like, when does it end? So yeah, I mean, I think I had mentioned to you off of stream that like it really does feel like this propaganda news machine and Trump especially like poked the bear. Now the bear is awake and it's just let loose and Republican elites like Romney and Cheney's the people that have been in Republican power for decades can't rein it in. They don't know what to do and now they're getting ousted by their own bear. And it's like, dude, I mean, I don't know. It's scary. It's scary to think that now, like half this country legitimately does not believe in our elections. How do we have a functioning democracy like that?
I wish I had an answer for you, man. But like in all seriousness, I don't know where you go from here. It seems like I mean, yeah, you took the words right out of my mouth. I mean, like that's what scares me is what if in 2024 either Harris or Biden wins a re-election and Congress is controlled by Republicans after the midterms or something like that. Um, do they certify the vote? And that's why I go back and forth on whether like Republicans should leave or not because the ones that have left have just been replaced with crazies. And okay, Mike Pence was willing to certify the election this time. Mitch McConnell was. But these people are going. Like we know that if Trump runs in 2024, Pence is not going to be the VP.
No
There's
way.
no way in hell he's going to be the VP, and the person who's going to replace him is probably not going to be as, I guess, constitutionally smart. And that's crazy for me to say because I am not a Pence guy. He is like everything I don't like in the Republican Party, to be completely honest. But he clearly at least has a conscience on him and understands the rule of law. And so that's where I'm worried. I think you're right. Is that like if every election now is going to be considered illegitimate, how do you run a country? And like it's different because Madeleine Albright, Secretary of State under Bill Clinton, wrote a great book that I'm reading right now called Fascism: A Warning. And sorry, I beat it over the head, but I'm just curious about fascism and the evolutions. And she basically says that each generation has their own iteration of fascism.
Right.
And to me, Hitler did it very well because he kind of came off as somewhat of a crazy moderate to a lot of Germany. So he was able to get into power. And then once he was in power, he eroded the institutions and took over everything. But to me, it sounds like the media has done Hitler's. Like, imagine if the media we have now was in the time of like a Hitler or a Mussolini or a Stalin or even a Franco or something. Like, it seems like the media needs to be held accountable before anything else does because like I've watched some of these press conferences with Jen Psaki and Fox News and Newsmax, and the questions they ask are so detached from reality, and these people are watching this and sucking it up, and now you have these like lawsuits in Arizona over bamboo in the ballots. Like they're trying to say these ballots were shipped in from China. Like it takes so many stretches to believe these things. But if you've been watching for the last 4 years and longer, I think you're too far gone, to be completely honest. Like, you and I can't sit down and have a 3 hour conversation with every person who thinks the election's stolen. And I think
Right.
that's the only way that it could fix it at this point is literally asking them, where'd you get this information? How'd you find out about this election? How did you think it was stolen? And we don't have time for that. So, like, that's what scares me, man, is I see both parties having some issues now because I think the Democratic Party feels like they're the party of reason, and rightfully so. But how do you act when the other party doesn't even think the grass is green when it's green?
Exactly. How do you have a conversation about how to best to grow grass if the one person doesn't even think it's in soil, right? Or whatever. Exactly. It's like how do you have that's why this whole unity thing is BS. Like how do you unify if half the country is literally like I will do everything in my power not to unify. Like okay, well we're just not going to unify then. And just like Mitch McConnell saying, I'm going to do 100% of my power to stop the Biden administration. Like, all right, well then, I guess we're not going to unify then. All right, like I guess we're not going to work together. Like it's strange. It's so weird to see. But I mean, I wanted to mention though that, like you said, like you don't think you made a really interesting point. Coming from your perspective, that you don't think Republicans should leave the party because the replacements will be crazier, right?
Mhm.
I wanted to say because just today it came out more than 100 Republicans, including former governors and lawmakers, are threatening to form a third party if the GOP doesn't split from Trump. Includes governors, members of Congress, and a Bush era cabinet secretary. What do you make of that? Like, I want to say like, where if you see, let's say you are like a congressman that was in that vote today, and you didn't want to vote Cheney out. Like, let's say you're like Jeff Flake's out, right? But what's that other guy, Kissinger, or I mean,
Yeah,
there's
Kissinger.
Kissinger, yeah. Like, let's say you're one of those, and you see your party literally, rejecting truth, and misleading your voters, right? You will want to be a fiscal conservative and a constitutionalist, but you don't feel at home. Like, what do you do? Like, can you understand why maybe some would leave? Like, I'm trying to see from their shoes. I see why they would want to leave, but I also see what you're saying was it might just mean the death of the GOP then.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's a really good question because I wish I had a perfect answer and I don't because Miles Taylor because I heard a little bit about this and like they've been kind of talking about it since February, but the movement's kind of been led by this Miles Taylor guy who he wrote that book Anonymous. I am part of the resistance inside the Trump administration,
Mm,
um, and let's be honest, man, like these people aren't convincing anyone. The
yeah.
the progressive left thinks they're all still neocons and they're still bad. Yeah, the Bidens and I think the U's, I'm not gonna put words in your mouth, but I think people like yourself and the like a little bit more rational would be willing to work with them. You know what I mean? But the problem is I don't think the majority of each side does. And
Mm,
so it brings me to a point is like realignments do happen in history. We've had a couple in our history in the United States, and to me it does seem like the GOP has become the QOP, the QAnon Republican Party, and I almost do see like I don't see going back from this because I don't know how Adam Kinzinger, whose own family sent him blackmail and threats, I don't see how he's become like gets reelected even. I just don't see an off ramp or even an on ramp. Like, what happens when no one listens to you if you start a third party, and no one listens to you if you stay in? It seems like the party has just hyper accelerated past them, and to me, it seems like they should stay like they should start a third party because they're not doing anything while they're inside of it. But then again. I think they need to appeal to independence, and that involves sane messaging. And I was happy to see the Bulwark podcast is actually now in the top 10 downloaded on iTunes, which is pretty big because they're kind of a centrist, center right movement that just wants to bring sanity. And so I think the crazies, like the Republicans, are so focused on the primaries right now, and they know that they don't need to be sane to win the primaries, that they can do this. But in a general election, I still don't think they have any clout.
Right.
And I think that's the strength of it is, to be completely honest, I think unity under Biden can work, but I think the Romneys need to just say, fuck it, excuse my language, and just go out and say, we're going to work with Biden because we need to find some middle ground, even if it's not everything we agree in. Okay, we found out we agree on a couple things: democracy, we agree on the Constitution, and we agree on the courts and kind of the rule of law. And I think there are some things we could agree on, but it's going to take the ones that are still in office to speak out. And that's why, to me, Liz Cheney, I would get her tatted on my back right now, just because this is going to be a pivotal moment in history. But like, yeah, to put it full circle, like these 100 former Republicans leave the party and try to bring sensibility. I don't really care if you leave or stay in, but sensibility to independents and moderates, because we have to remember that Trump only has what 30 something, or Trump had when he went in the election, he only had about 32, 33, I think, percent of the popular vote. And so they can do it. They can do it. But these Fox News outlets and Newsmax need to stop propping up that small percentage. And that to me means, like, do you fight cancel culture with cancel culture? I just don't know. Like, it's just, we're in such a conundrum that I don't think there's any part of history that would, like, I'm kind of a historian myself, and I don't see any historical precedent that sets us for this. And that's why it's going to take some creativity.
Yeah, I think that. I mean, I think you're right. I think what we're seeing right now is the strategy is set for 22. All right. The January 6th happened. There was a fork in the road, and the GOP has decided to take a turn to continue on the Trump path, to continue down that rhetoric, continue down that big lie. Really, again, that's what's being called now. And but but we had that moment where maybe McConnell and maybe McCarthy had that moment where they decide, okay, do we double down on this or not after January 6th? Well, now what we're seeing from this vote on Liz Cheney removing her from her position of power in the party, this is the evidence that, okay, they have really doubled down on the Trump thing. This is now the strategy that they feel is going to win them back seats in 22. I think they're probably right. Like, again, like you said, like Liz
Yeah.
Cheney's not popular with her party. People don't like that kind of Republican anymore, even though it's 90% in line with what Trump ideologically wanted. The rhetoric behind, especially the election, is not there, and people wanted that. So we're going to see if the strategy works. I think it will. I think it will short term in 22. But like you said, I agree. I don't think long term this is a good idea. I don't think the long term this is a good thing for the Republicans, because when you get to that national stage, this stuff looks ridiculous. You might be able to win in states like Marjorie Taylor Greene or replace a moderate with a far right candidate, but as far as the presidency, man, I don't know, man. Like, there won't be another Trump. There's not going to be another person like Donald Trump. And if he loses again, which is highly likely, or just doesn't run again, I don't know where the Republican Party goes. I mean, they have their rhetoric behind it, but like on that national stage, that general election, I don't know, man. But obviously, what we're seeing right now is certainly historic. A massive realignment in the Republican Party, a rejection of past elites. Romney now on the chopping block, Cheney the chopped off. A lot of people leaving the party, literally hundreds of Republicans leaving the party. And yeah, I mean, guess Liz Cheney was canceled. So I want to just read a quote from her, because she is not mincing words when she gave like about a 7-minute speech the other day. And the one quote I wanted to say was, "Those who are refusing to accept the rulings of our courts are at war with the Constitution." So even a war hawk in her rhetoric around the election, huh? Yeah. Any final thoughts? Wrap this one up before we move on to the next episode, Alex.
Yeah, just wanted to say something real quick here. Is that I think you're right. In the long term, this isn't going to work. I do assume Trump will be the nominee in 2024 unless something happens health wise. He is getting older, but I think Bill Maher called him like a sewage rat or something. He lives forever. Like he eats crappy and just keeps going. But I think Liz Cheney is thinking about the long term, and I think she'll be around. And the other thing I'll say is for our listeners, check out this breaking or this kind of progressing story about Kevin McCarthy. It looks like he hired this guy named Brian Jack, who was a top advisor to Trump, and he's one of the guys who met with the protest organizers before the storming of the Capitol on January 6th. McCarthy, after the storming of the Capitol, said he wanted a commission, but he's backtracked. And then, weirdly, in March, he hired one of the guys who was an advisor and met with people for this Stop the Steal rally. And so I think there's some internal shit going on here involving Kevin McCarthy himself. And so I challenge people to check that out. Newsweek, The Bulwark, and CNN have reported on it at this point. But I think Kevin McCarthy might be facing some issues, and that's why he doesn't want this commission opened up. So, yeah.
The winds are changing, or the winds of change are blowing, or whatever the hell the conversation is. Anyway, thank you guys. This episode, if you're watching live, stay tuned. We're going to be talking about Latin America, specifically Colombia and some other countries in that area. What's going on down there and the unrest we're seeing. And yeah, that episode will be available online as well. Thanks for watching the Town and Concord.
Peace.
Okay, one down.
Sweet. If you mind, give me 20 seconds.
Sure, do it, go for it.
Yeah, this Kevin McCarthy story is weird. I'd recommend checking it out. It's very strange.
All right, pop this puppy over her, over der. All right.
Okie dokie artichoke.
Okay. Okay. So we're gonna do Colombia, right?
Colombia. And then, yeah, we could talk about, like whatever. Like you wanted to mention Honduras. I might just mention El Salvador. And,
Sure,
yeah.
sure.
Jeopardy has been on a
gosh.
roll
Oh,
lately.
no.
Will today bring another big payday?
That should be easy with
Okay.
categories like.
I have an ad going on. I have no idea where it's coming from.
Yeah.
Tonight at 7 on ABC 7.
Sounds about right.
The Hill. It was The Hill.
The Hill, I actually like The Hill a lot, but they're really bad with ads.
They suck with ads, dude. So many of these. I mean, that's just the way it is now. It's like you just get bombarded. Okay.
Yes, you do. Burn it all down.
There we go. All right, you ready?
Oh, man. Yes, sir. Let's do it.
Okay, recording in 3, 2, 1. Hello, welcome back to the Tonic Accord podcast. Today we're going to be talking about Colombia as well as other countries in Latin America. I'm updating you on some of the civic unrest we're seeing in these areas, updates on environmental issues, political issues, and kind of how that region of the world is doing coming out of the coronavirus pandemic. My name is Drew Nepoli. I work in political media, and I'm a Chapman University graduate in political science. And I'm joined here by my friend and co-host Alex Kapitko, who's also a graduate in political science. And tell us a little bit about what you do, your certifications, and why we're talking about this today.
Yes, sir. I am currently working for a think tank out of Africa, where basically we write economic and political proposals. I might be working as a policy advisor with kind of a police reform group, and I'll be starting a master's in public policy and administration soon in Chicago at Northwestern. So yeah, keeping busy, not staying sane, fun.
I think also, we're both. I mean, obviously, we're both white dudes from America, but I think we both of us have an affinity for Latin America. I've spent a good amount of time there. Um, you spent a lot of time in Spain, but also studying Latin America. And so,
Mhm.
yeah, anytime these stories hit, I feel a little like I feel personally interested, and invested, and then also on top of it, as far as Colombia, I have some very good friends of mine that I've known for a long time that are from Colombia. I'm, American citizens, but from Colombia, and they've been posting about this a lot recently. And that's what piqued my interest of like, oh yeah, what is going on? And so, yeah, let's kind of dive into it. So I want to give a quick, synopsis, and then we'll of course get delve into it a little bit more. But um, not long ago, in April, Colombia's government submitted a tax reform bill. And the idea was to increase taxes and close tax loopholes that they were. The argument that these tax loopholes were hurting the country, and were also preventing it from getting a higher investment grade on the international scale, like business scene, I guess. And so the idea was to increase some taxes, close some tax loopholes, and that overall that would benefit the government of Colombia. However, coming out of the coronavirus pandemic, tax increases are never popular, and I think they're also significantly less popular when you're coming out of, you know, tragedy or recession or whatever you want to call this pandemic. I think adding tax increases on top of that is going to piss a lot of people off. Well, turns out it did, and these tax increases led to protests. However, the response to the protests by the Colombian police was very violent and led to deaths. And now, over the last few weeks, we're seeing at least 25 people have died, including one police officer, in these protests in Colombia over this tax reform bill. The tax reform bill was withdrawn. The government felt the pressure from the protests, and the tax reform bill was withdrawn. So it's no longer in play. However, I think it's fair to say that the protests have taken on a new life to be more against police brutality as a whole, to represent other things like indigenous rights. There's now indigenous rights activists, and environmental activists now joining protests, and kind of just anti-government corruption in general. And so, even though the catalyst for the protests is this tax reform bill, even though that's gone, the protests continue to stay, and it's more kind of anti-government corruption, anti-police brutality, and that is what we're seeing still today. Is protests erupting in Colombia over a wide range of issues, but mainly just disenfranchisement and distrust of the government, and again, especially the police force. And even though the tax reform bill has been withdrawn. So,
Yes.
so there's the background. I know that was a little lengthy, but yeah, Alex, what do you see out of this? What's like your initial takes? What are your thoughts?
Well, it seems like COVID's kind of brought all the cracks to the surface.
Yeah.
I actually think this tax reform bill was probably correct. Um, from what I've gathered, at least from the reading we've done here, it could potentially benefit 19 million Colombians, that are the poorest in the country. And it does look at reforming some of the most significant loopholes. But again, like you said, following a pandemic where, especially in places like Colombia, no one's doing very well, it means people are going to be angry. And to me, I think the root of these protests is understandable, but people are also just angry at everything. They're scared, they're nervous, and they're struggling. And so I think that we're going to be seeing this a lot through Latin America, is that these countries spent exuberantly during the pandemic, and now they're trying to look at how do we pay for it. According to The Economist, since the pandemic, Colombia's deficit tripled by 8%, or tripled, sorry, to nearly 8% of their GDP. Their current president, President Duque, he was kind of elected to bring hope and change. He was pretty young. He was only a senator for, I think, one term. And his goal was to kind of bring change. And unfortunately,
Reminds
it
me of
hasn't
Obama.
happened. Actually, yeah, I think I remember reading like a year ago that people were actually calling him kind of the Colombian Obama,
Yeah.
kind of center right version of Obama, but he's actually lost support on both sides. But to me, this is not about the tax reform bill anymore.
Right.
It's just about Colombia's drug trafficking has gone up. the FARC, which Duque basically had to oversee the outcome of a bill signed between the government and the FARC, for those who don't know, which was a kind of a guerrilla war group that was anti-government. And the previous president, whose name I'm totally spacing on, so forgive me, he signed a major deal with the FARC in 2016, I think, which was huge. But since then, it hasn't really paid out, and there's been a lot of violence against local politicians. Crime is rising, and people are poor. More than 500,000 businesses have closed, and stuff like that. So it's people are struggling, and I think this reform bill was kind of a mobilization against them. The problem is Colombia is having a third wave. I saw that in Cali, like 80% of ICU beds are full. So now we're mixing violence, on both sides into that. And I just think this is kind of a harbinger of things to come in Latin America, to be completely honest, because these governments just don't have the surpluses to deal with this, and they need to pay for it, and people are hungry. And yeah, rant aside, like I don't know, man. I think this is just maybe the next year or two in Latin America in general.
It's interesting too, because in the case of Colombia specifically, there was a period of years where I think people were really positive, and in fact, that Duce, or I don't know how to pronounce his name, Duce. What is it?
I'm gonna go with Duque.
Duque. Where Duque was very popular, and it was because of the deal with FARC. So FARC is a radical left wing, like I mean, basically communist guerrilla group. And they've been living in the highlands of Colombia and fighting the Colombian government for decades. The United States provided arms and surplus military equipment to Colombia's defense forces to fight FARC. Surprise, the Americas doesn't exactly like communist guerrilla groups. That's nothing new. So, just to keep that in the context of what's going on in Colombia. And so it was, like you said, decades and decades of violence and guerrilla warfare within the country. Now, in 2016, an agreement was signed that led to relative peace, and people felt really optimistic. And Duque, experienced a time of really high popularity. And an interesting take I've heard about these protests is that the police force has not accepted that time, that era is over, right? It's this idea that, like, protests, anti-government protests in the past in Colombia were result of FARC, were guerrilla tactics, or maybe had an air of militarization, right? So there's a protest movement that sparks, and then FARC is also using that chaos to maneuver, right? That's not the case, at least from what I understand and what we know. That's not the case that's happening right now. This is not a political thing as far as FARC. It's not like a far left communist uprising. It's just citizens disenfranchised with the current government. But I think the response is still in that mindset of we're fighting a war, right? And in fact, there was even a anecdotal but important story about a journalist, a Colombian journalist that was beaten and forced to drink urine of the Colombian police. And when he was getting beat, and he said something along the lines of, "Stop! Like, I'm a human rights defender. I'm a human rights defender," something like that. And they beat him, and they said, "No, you're not. You're a guerrilla. You're a piece of shit guerrilla." So obviously, the police think that these people are still like far left guerrillas, even though they're not. They're just civilians. And so I think that mindset, I mean, there's a famous, I mean, this is very different. I'm just, for the sake of the podcast, there's a really funny Bill Burr joke about how he gets all angry and it gets his dog really angry, but then he has to try and calm his dog down, being like, "No, there's actually nothing wrong. Like, I'm just angry at something else." But you rile up this dog to get so angry, but then when there's nothing to get angry at, it lashes out. And that's what I think is happening is you had this force for decades that was, you're designed to take down guerrillas, you're designed to take down cartels, you're designed to military style defense, to take out left-wing guerrillas and to take out cartel drug whatever traffickers. And then now it's like, actually, and then boom, you have some civic unrest today, and so they're geared up, they're ready to go, they're like a Rottweiler, super angry. And you're like, no, hold on though, these are not guerrillas, these are not traffickers, these are Colombian citizens, these are just protesters, these are peaceful protesters at first. And so the response by the police is way overpowered compared to what it should have been, and I think it's just because they're used to a different era.
That's a very good point. Yeah, and no, that's a really good point because it does seem like that's the case here, and I'm sure both of us could draw some parallels. Obviously, not quite the same, but there are definitely parallels in the United States, and like it kind of pulls me back to like you can symbolically change the issue or have some like superficial peace deal, but if you don't change the system and the training and the ideology behind it, then you're not going to get very far.
Huh.
And
Interesting.
yeah, like to me, Alvaro Uribe, who is the previous president, who actually did sign that deal with the FARC before he stepped down. Now, side note, he's actually distanced himself from Duque, who they're in the same party, so you would think they would not be distancing themselves from each other. But yeah, like it seems like this was something for Uribe to get the Nobel Peace Prize. It looks great, right? Like again, Drew, time and time again, we've talked about it on this podcast. Symbolic peace is not always actual peace.
Right.
Like a lot of these Nobel Peace Prize winners or candidates or whatever, it sometimes doesn't last, and there's a lot of flaws. And I was really happy because Colombia, since I've like been following it, it sounds like it's really cleaned up. There was a time when Americans were told don't go to Colombia, and now there's a burgeoning kind of artistic scene, burgeoning businesses, and then the pandemic hit, and it really seems like again that kind of brought out the cracks. And I think that's a very interesting point, though, about how the police are still responding to counter-protesters and protesters like it's the FARC.
Right.
And that is interesting to me because now it seems like both sides again, because no one's willing to talk, which is a big theme of this podcast, conversation, finding middle ground. No one's willing to do it, and there was a great Guardian article that was kind of talking about how this has happened. Like, Duque is now promising a national dialogue, over like free tuition and stuff, but he scrapped everything else and it ignored broad calls for police reform. And it seems like I think it was last week I was hearing, so this is a little outdated, but I was hearing like the police were just indiscriminately shooting people. Like there were like 15-year-old kids getting shot.
Yeah.
Like the police had no care. And like again, like that's not how you maintain a civil society. You need to treat everyone under the Constitution of the country and under their rights as a citizen of their country. And it seems time and time again, people in power don't get that. And, honestly, I don't blame Duque for this. It sounds like he's in a very, like, tight spot.
Yes, it does.
And to be honest, again, like, I'll say it again, that tax reform bill actually sounded good. But it just seemed to kind of stir the pot. And you're right. Like, it's going to be interesting to see what happens here just because it sounds like this would mean a complete kind of overhaul actually of the police and the whole system.
There's an interesting. I was reading about like the different types of police there are because the shooting has started with I think it was like the Colombian equivalent of the National Guard. So there is a task force for protests where the guys wear like a ton of like they almost look like hockey goalies. I think the New York Times had the best picture. It's this guy right here. So this guy, he wears all this stuff, but actually those are like protest riot dudes, riot police. And they're not actually allowed to carry lethal weapons at all. They don't have any lethal weapons. They have all this armor, but it's like I think they have like some tear gas, batons, like that kind of thing. So they're barred from having any lethal weaponry. They're designed to be these tank guys to just like control crowds. It actually makes sense they're scary as hell, right? But obviously, if you did have a legitimately rowdy crowd, you do need some people to control it. I understand that happens. So, yeah, so what's interesting is these are not the guys shooting them. These are, I'm sure that I'm sure that there's probably some other stuff going on. I imagine some of the beatings probably happened by these dudes. But the actual shots being fired are the National Guard brought in because things escalated, right? So things would escalate. A couple of these guys beat a couple people. A couple of the people in civilians start throwing back tear gas, maybe start throwing bottles. Things get escalated. Now you have the National Guard coming in, and apparently the National Guard is not issued this armor, but they are issued weapons. They are issued guns. So you have originally a highly armored person with no lethal capabilities other than beating the shit out of you. Or but then the reinforcements were lightly armored people with high lethal capabilities. So when those people got threatened, when the National Guard felt like things were getting out of hand, they didn't have any other way of controlling than firing their weapons. So that's now where we're seeing, okay, well, kids are getting killed, people are dying. Multiple dozens of people are dying because now the response by the National Guard escalated things to the use of lethal force. So that is where we're seeing the deaths coming from.
Damn. Yeah, and you would think there would be some middle ground, right? Between like we need reinforcements and we're gonna start open firing. Like I just don't know. Like, what do you think? Like, what do you think would take to change that? Like, like more cooperation, more training. Like to me, that just seems like you have two completely separated, units that like the overlap causes death.
I mean, look, again, I'm certainly no expert, and I believe even less so in Colombian government and politics and their institutions. But I have to imagine, similar to what I like that take about how the police is responding to things like they've used to, but in a different context. I think that's just it's like now. I think you need to have a leader that understands. I need to they can install a head of the police chief or whatever that understands that we're in a new world for Colombia now. We're not fighting FARC. We're not in an era where we're constantly fighting left wing guerrillas. At least for now, if the peace holds, who knows? That could come back, of course. But like adjusting that mentality, and again, also literally adjusting the equipment, maybe not taking as much military style equipment. Again, drawing parallels to the United States. I mean, Colombia is not the only Colombia is not the only country with a problem with militarized police. I mean, that's a conversation in the United States we have today over the massive military style APCs some police forces have. So maybe that it's that idea of changing the rhetoric and changing the way you view policing. It is not fighting a war. It is nothing like fighting a war. It is everything to do with protecting and serving a community, which is very different. So I think that mentality shift, like just Colombia in general, like the military or the militarized police there has to have that mental shift.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely, absolutely. I totally agree with you. I think it's the mindset. Like again, like I said, you can change your government. You can symbolically end a very long lasting crisis. But if the training and the actual apparatus of doing it doesn't change, it's going to stay the same. And I think that's true with the United States as well with police. But obviously we're not going to get into that. But to me, also, there's a political issue to this too. Not separating us from the just devastation and tragedy here, but Duque is completely politically isolated. He has no stable majority. That Uribe, the former president who was kind of instrumental in making this truce with the FARC, he's distanced himself from Duque. And the worst part is that there's a far left guy who likes Nicolas Maduro and Hugo Chavez, who is running in Colombia, and he wants to print more money to solve the issue. And I'm just worried that Colombia, man, I was actually just so far thinking about how Colombia's got so far. And then the pandemic came. And now it seems like Colombia's in that pendulum again. Okay, they tried out center right. So now they're just going to jump back to far left, And I think that's what we're going to see potentially out of this is the protesters and this reform movement siding with this guy who, did I write his name down? Yeah, Gustavo Petro, who is just a very far left socialist who likes what Venezuela's doing. And then we're just going to probably see more unrest. And so that's why I think it's just this cycle. And until you fix the root of the problem, it's just going to maintain the same. And it's just too bad. Like my one solution though I would have is that I was reading that 60% of Colombians work in the informal economy, right? So they're not taxed. They're making less than the state would require, and no one has tabs on how well they're doing. I would just say the informal economy needs a spotlight on it, and it needs to be made mainstream. Obviously, like cocaine and that stuff's not going to be made mainstream unless you legalize it, but I think that's the big issue in a lot of Latin America is that people are just making money under the table, and they're not being taxed. They're not part of the system, and these countries are not keeping tabs on their citizens. Not in like a creepy Big Brother way, but just in like there's not enough people paying into the system or getting aid. And I think it's all kind of rooted in this, like you talked about the FARC, that, and then this informal sector. I think came to head with COVID, and it's going to be a problem. I'm curious before we get out of here. There were a couple other countries briefly to talk about. You sent that great article about Honduras. What's happening there? Because I think it's all kind of linked in a weird way.
Yeah. This is one that I follow like environmental news. I follow subreddits regarding environmentalism as well as indigenous rights and indigenous justice. Those two things coincide a lot in Latin America and South America, and they're
Mhm.
often the subject of oppression. It's like to be an environmentalist in America is very different than being an environmentalist in a developing nation in South America. To be an environmentalist in America means I got my Nalgene bottle, I donate to the Sierra Club, I vote with people that I think value the environment, and then I have a recyclable straw and I go about my day. To be an environmentalist in South America is risking death. And so, if we're seeing here, environmental activists are being killed in Honduras over their opposition to mining. There's a national park in Honduras the government has slated 200 hectares of it to be mined. And this is just one of many instances of like this, of like native land, indigenous land, or even just public land being sectioned off for industrial purposes. And people have been fighting back in the form of like occupation. So right here is they have a camp here called the Camp in Defense of Water and Life. This is in the Carlos Escaleras National Park. And they're protesting the permits given out by the government to use it for a mine. Even though the mine's not even up yet, there's already been an upset to the local community because the guy developing the mine is building roads. He's building roads which are leading to pollution in the local waters. This happens all the time with construction, even agriculture, pesticides, like any kind of construction material or pesticides can leak into the water systems and threaten the health of a water system in an area. I even saw this firsthand in Costa Rica when I did my studies down there looking at sustainable development. And so one is multiple. So in 2019, 12 people were arrested that are part of this camp, and then that have been, the charges faced were usurpation, arson, robbery, unlawful detention, illicit association, and aggravated robbery. A litany of charges on people just for, protesting for environmental movement. Multiple people have died. I see it probably once a month in the news threads I follow about environmentalism. Like once a month, there's an environmental activist that's been found with, burn marks, 2 shots to the head in Honduras, in El Salvador, in Brazil, especially. A lot of environmental activists are just found dead in Brazil because they're trying to stop industrial mining and industrial logging. And so this is a UN group has even said that the detention of these people protesting at this camp in defense of water and life is arbitrary and has called for them to be released. And so it's just one of these examples of how different the fight is for some of these issues in other parts of the world. Like environmentalism almost is, I feel like is so important, but in America it almost gets like a bad rep because of like straws and turtles' noses, or I gotta these paper straws at Starbucks are so lame. Or it's like for other people it is literally life and death. It is literally the waters in my environment are polluted by mining companies that I had no control over the ability to give them the permit or anything like that. And because I'm protesting this, I'm now being either illegally detained or murdered.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's very well said. I mean, yeah, like it's interesting you brought this up because it triggered a few memories from I think last year. I read about Honduras in this book called The Lost City of the Monkey God. I want to say it was called. It was either Monkey God or Monkey King, but it was basically about a lost temple by this indigenous group that no one ever studied in Honduras. It was probably Incan, pre-Incan, and the the archaeologists from the U.S. and the U.K. just to get there, they faced just issues left and right from the military and other security forces. They're like, okay, we're in a national park, we're in a reserve, but we don't feel like it. Like there's people after us, just every day. And I remember that when I was in Costa Rica when I was much younger, like I barely remember it, but I remember my parents were telling me like when we would drive through the rainforest in like Tamarindo and Arenal and stuff, it would be like there were police that just actively were not supporting that. And same in Peru. I mean, I talked to people there, and it's like it seems like environmentalists in Latin America are up against the state. It seems like they don't have really a apparatus. Because like in the U.S., I think why it's become so toxic is that, well, not toxic. Like I don't want to sound like some anti-environmentalist, but I think it's become toxic because you just have people buying Teslas and telling you to.
It's perceived differently. It's perceived differently.
Exactly. But like you said, there it is life and death. And, I mean, the irony is, well, not really irony, but it's just like these companies are multinational. These companies in these countries, they are like this one in Honduras. I was reading that Canada and the U.S., like it doesn't want to do anything because it's receiving so much buying power. It's exporting heavily to the United States and Canada. And it doesn't want to step up to this because money's important. And like I feel like governments need to be held more accountable and protect their own people, not just, economic and national interests. Like the term banana republic comes from Honduras because of the banana trade and the idea of they were propping up dictators basically to make money off of bananas like the US was. And like this whole thing needs to change, man. Like this whole thing needs to change. And like I think you're right. We, especially in Latin America, need productive environmentalism, and we just need people that are actually using a platform to do so. And it seems like government and military and police and security forces don't care about the environment because they're propped up by these kind of national interest based governments. I don't know. That wasn't worded well, but yeah, that's how I feel.
Industry, man. I mean, just whether it's government owned or owned by a multinational company, it's still the idea is that one entity, the state, wants to exploit resources, and these people feel that they were here first, or not, even if it's not indigenous based land, it's still public land, and that it shouldn't be exploited as such. I want to give an idea of just how serious this kind of thing is. I'm just reporting here that Honduras is the deadliest place in the world for environmental defenders. Hundreds have been killed since 2009, including the indigenous environmental leader Berta Caceres, who was assassinated in 2016. So far, 8 people who have opposed this one mine in Honduras, 8 people who have opposed it have been killed, putting its owner, Inversiones Los Pinares, at the center of a deadly environmental conflict in the mineral-rich Bajo Aguan region. So, like, again, like I'm not really like I'm not trying to promote a solution to this. I mean, obviously, I think what should happen is people should not kill each other over mines. I think we really need to take into consideration our industries and how they affect the environment, especially indigenous sovereignty, right? I think that. But I'm not going to sit here and solve this problem, obviously, and I'm certainly not the authoritative figure on this issue. I simply wanted to bring it to a light because of how real this kind of thing is for so many people. And like you said, environmentalism in America is perceived so differently. It's buying a Tesla, and it's recycling. And here it's getting assassinated, right? Like I think it'd be crazy. It'd be wild if someone like Steve Irwin was like murdered. I mean, he was killed.
He was technically murdered.
He was murdered by a stingray, but no. But I mean, like I'm trying to think of I'm trying to think of someone in this context that like to ring this home, or like I don't know who's an environmental hero in the U.S., but like a Bear Grylls. Like imagine if Bear Grylls was like, protect our water, and then just got like double tapped, and we're all just supposed to accept that. Like no, people would be like, no, oh my God, you can't kill. Like that is every day. That's every day for people in South America, that if you speak out against these industries, you risk assassination. So I don't know. I just wanted to for a lot of people, I don't think they realize how intense the fight is for environmentalism out there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I real briefly want to touch on El Salvador, but
Sure.
before we do, I was just going to say that I think you're right. And at least from my obviously uninformed I don't know much about environmentalism in Latin America, but from what I've seen, it seems like in the U.S. they have figureheads that are good at swaying public opinion. Like Honduras doesn't have a Leonardo DiCaprio who's making documentaries about it.
Sure.
It seems to be an indigenous problem mainly in a lot of these countries. And for that reason, I don't think there's enough ears listening. And it seems like in the U.S. and Europe and a lot of Western countries, there's a figurehead of it. And it seems like Latin America doesn't have it because the public is either unaware of it and the governments don't care. So,
or anytime you start to have a figurehead, they get assassinated,
right?
Like Berta Cáceres. So,
right.
Yeah, if you do start to have a leader, they get whacked.
Which would just, like, imagine if Leo DiCaprio, who I don't actually think is a great environmentalist, to be honest, but at least he's bringing awareness to people who don't know anything about it. But imagine if he just got whacked. Like, that just wouldn't be possible in a lot of the West. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
I mean, it could be, I guess. But.
I know, but I mean, that's the kind of thing. Is like I think environmentalism is cozy in the United States. Not that everyone that is an environmentalist is like this. I'm not saying that. I just think that the perception of environmentalism in the United States is that it's like slacktivism, and
yes.
Where in the world it is not, and out there, and there are activists putting their life on the line for protecting our planet, and I think it's honorable and brave.
Absolutely.
Let us know what's going on in El Salvador, and then we can wrap this episode up.
Sounds good. So I think a lot of people know that Biden is having some problems at the border. I think a lot of it is overhyped. Fox News, I think early on kind of bought into it and decided to change it. And now close to 50% of Americans do think there's a crisis at the border. And the reason why I'm mentioning that first is because El Salvador is one of the countries where we need to work with their government in order to make a fix. And Biden has been talking about that under Obama. He actually met with a lot of Central American countries and did make some leeway there. But the problem is that Nayib Bukele, who is, I think he's like 39, he's around 40. He's the authoritarian president of El Salvador right now. He won with like 90% of the vote, which is always to me a little bit questionable. Yeah. But he was voted. The Economist a year ago said he was the most popular president in Latin America with that 90% vote. But it turns out he has replaced the Supreme Court. He has sacked the Attorney General, and he controls a supermajority inside of the Congress, Parliament, all that jazz. And the problem is this actually kind of sounds like Viktor Orban in Hungary, but like El Salvador version. This is like a very young, aspirational politician who basically is very far right. He doesn't believe in abortion in any circumstances, and he's definitely down to punish critics. And so the worry is that this is only the beginning of his realm of just terror, where he, like, I think it was last year, he basically wanted to lock up people even if they went out to buy groceries during the pandemic. And the Supreme Court was like, no, you can't do that. So he ordered the police to basically block the gates of the Supreme Court until the decision was changed. Like, this guy's an autocrat. And he's quite a scary autocrat, and he's slowly like consolidating power in El Salvador. And the problem is that the economic situation is getting worse in El Salvador, and Kamala Harris has called out him, but Biden has remained relatively milquetoast on it because he needs to work with this guy to help quell immigration into the United States, because El Salvador is one of those main ones that is seeing a huge, movement of people outside of El Salvador, less than Mexico, for example. And so Revista Factum, which is a local magazine in Honduras, says that democracy has died in El Salvador. His party won 56 of 84 seats in the recent government. Another El Salvadorian magazine said that we are at the start of a long night as democracy is going to sleep. It sounds like this guy's going to be around for a long time. And the problem is he's in his late 30s or early 40s. So he's going to be around for a while. And he's basically consolidated power to the point where like it'd be really hard to get rid of him. And it sounds like what happened was there was a civil war in the late 90s, and the government secretly negotiated an amnesty law that helped bring the war to a close quickly, but it kind of didn't actually set up a good institution for elections or parties or democracy going down the road. So it basically gave these spoils and independent like power to the remaining political parties. And this Bukele guy just stepped outside, started a new party, and is kind of destroying El Salvador as we speak. So the reason I bring it up is because it is relative to the immigration problems on the southern border of the U.S. is because it's going to be really hard, I think, for Biden to actually work with this guy and do anything.
It looks like we're gonna have to pay him.
Yes.
It looks like the United States is gonna have to pay this guy to avoid a border crisis. Great, yeah, another young, charismatic, authoritarian asshole. Awesome, that's great. Yeah, I didn't know much about Bukele. Yeah,
Me
I'm just
neither.
and so definitely one to keep an eye on. It looks like he is going to appeal to the United States and China to help fill the gaps in his government's budget. And yeah, so we're basically going to be paying a guy to hopefully avoid a border crisis, which apparently is also already happening. Very strange,
Absolutely.
very strange. But yeah, I mean, but certainly though the take is that, I mean, the main source of this migrant crisis is it's not Mexico anymore. It's this Central American triangle. It's Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, and and this guy is helping fuel it. And we'll have to see what happens because man, yeah, it's a strange one. I didn't see this guy coming at all. That's gonna wrap up this episode of the Tonic Accord. We touched on a lot of icebergs, so please don't fault us for not going super in depth and onto any of these issues. We are not experts, but we certainly like to stay informed on these topics. I think we have valid opinions, and we want to hear yours as well. Comment and leave a comment on the YouTube, leave a comment on the Twitch. We do read them, and we encourage a conversation around these issues. So let us know your thoughts. Stay tuned for more Tonic Accord.
Sounds good.